Hello everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. My name is Zach, and I'm one of your hosts.
And I am the other host by, I suppose, inheritance, Aaron.
It makes it sound like we have like a will or some kind of life insurance policy. We don't, as far as I know.
Not to the best of my knowledge. I inherited it from you.
Oh, well, I guess actually,
it was your idea.
Life insurance really wouldn't make sense, I guess. That would be like, never mind.
It
doesn't matter, but what does matter is all you old and new fans that are coming onto the show, thank you for tuning in and listening to us. And also, if you don't mind, we really do appreciate likes, subscribes, follows, retweets, sharing, whatever you can do to get the show out there to your friends and family. We really do appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. And positive reviews, if possible, are always appreciated. It's something that really does give us some visibility, and we always appreciate it when we see those. Negative reviews, post to not LinkedIn, Grubhub.
Yelp it. Yeah, but in all seriousness, we do take constructive criticism. We do look at those comments. We do look at everything that people say whenever we get a new one. So, feel free to post your constructive criticism. It really does help, especially if it's like, wow, you all suck at introductions, which, not invalid.
Yeah, demonstrably true. But final thought, and we keep forgetting to mention this every now and again. It is actually also worth mentioning that we do have a YouTube presence. There is no video component to it, but if that is your easiest access to stuff like this, feel free to check us out on YouTube. It's the easiest place to comment, and we will read those as much as we can before we go insane.
Yep, exactly. And for those that are curious about what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking a little bit about graphics versus gameplay / performance is really the primary topic of today's discussion. For those wondering, Aaron and Zach, why are you talking about graphics versus gameplay or performance? And to you, I have to say, well, there's been a lot of games coming out lately that are very, very, very popular. And to say that they are not AAA quality when it comes to fidelity is I feel like that's an understatement. Just to point one out that I pointed out to Aaron is BattleBit Remastered, which looks like a Roblox game. It's not a Roblox game. It's actually a made with Unity game. So, shout out for that. But right now it's like blowing up on Steam. So I brought it up to Aaron. I was like, it's a really good time to talk a little bit about the fact that a lot of games that are doing really well right now kind of look like doo-doo. That's not entirely true. We'll get into why I'm wrong in saying that later. But what are your thoughts, Aaron?
Well, first, a quick caveat, just in case anyone hears any weird audio inconsistent audio here. I am actually recording this from the Windy City. I am in a hotel room in the Chicago area. So if my audio sounds bonkers, I sincerely apologize. But I'll do my best on the back end. That sounded dirty. But in the interest of actually getting back to what Zach was talking about, my thoughts on that are many of them. I have so many thoughts. Yeah, people, as technology has been able to move forward to the point where we can create borderline photorealistic, if not almost heightened photorealistic, both objects and characters being the more difficult betwixt the two, but also potentially the more important depending on the game. People have started to really prioritize that in terms of like, what's the selling point of this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think personally this is going to be a very simplistic answer that took me a really long time to get to. There's room for both. A game does not have to be photorealistic to be either enjoyable or successful. And to go to BattleBits, I think that the art style needs to be recognized for the technique that went into that style.
Yeah.
To some degree. So I honestly, to reference one of the articles that we were going to reference at some point, but not in too much depth at this early stage of the conversation, it is the debate just doesn't make sense to me. I don't fully understand it. There are moments when I do, and then there are moments when I'm like, why is somebody complaining about this?
Yeah.
So yeah, but it certainly has been a debate, especially since we're still in what I would call like the early to mid stage of the newer console generation. It was only about a year ago that people were able to get their hands on any of the newest consoles from Microsoft or Sony. And those games are more or less selling themselves on graphical fidelity. And, well, the consoles are actually selling themselves on their power to enhance graphical fidelity. And I don't necessarily disagree with that as a selling point. But I think there are a lot of nuances that are being ignored in that conversation. And so we just kind of wanted to address some of that.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, right? So why does this actually matter? There's not really like a huge debate, I think, on like the consumer side about graphics versus gameplay or performance right now necessarily. But, you know, what's interesting about it is exactly what you said. There seems to be, and it's weird because there's not really a lot of like literature online about it, but it does seem like graphics are a massive marketing, technique for studios and console manufacturers.
As they say, a pretentious chef would say you eat first with your eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the funny thing about that too is the presentation of food. If you can't tell, Aaron and I have been watching The Bear, but the presentation of food does actually impact, you know, the way that you taste it, right? Which is kind of crazy, but I think kind of the difference in what we're talking about. Well, I won't even say the difference. I do think there's an interplay. We'll get into that, but because I don't want to lose my initial thought, I think that there's almost an overemphasis on high fidelity games that is largely pushed by the people selling us the games, the people selling us the consoles. Because like you said, I actually hadn't even thought about that. So that's a really good point, Aaron. Is that like whenever you're looking at like PlayStation versus Xbox, what's one of the things that always pops up? It's like, well, how does this game look on Xbox versus on PlayStation? It's never generally, at least like the YouTube video thumbnails that I see are almost never showing like frames per second or something regarding performance. It's almost always like a texture comparison or like a, you know, lighting comparison and da-di-da-di-da. And, you know, there's been such a high emphasis on ray tracing. It's all these things that are like,
yeah.
Like how much value do they actually add? Like, yes, they are very, very pretty. You can have some really, really cool stuff, but TLDR, there's this big push in how important graphics are. And I feel like a lot of that's manufactured by the industry itself, pushing that onto players. And I think things like, you know, BattleBit and Valheim are examples of, you know, games that don't look traditionally like really attractive, but to your earlier point, and we'll dive into the art style side of things, but they have like a cohesive art style and they have really tight gameplay mechanics, and they spend a lot of time really emphasizing that instead of like this really high fidelity, photorealistic world. The one thing I also just want to say real quick is that I feel like the super negative side of being overly focused on photorealism is you get games like Jedi Survivor. I don't know how much you've looked into it, Aaron, but like that game runs like hot doo-doo on PC. Even on PC rigs that are like incredibly overpowered. That game does not run well, and it's entirely because they focus so much on it, like having amazing ray tracing, being super beautiful. They focused on the graphics first over optimization and gameplay, and I really just feel like it screwed that game over.
Yeah, that is actually one of the points that I wanted to bring up, and I'm glad you brought it up early, so that way I can talk about it for longer. The yeah, the selling point of a product does not have to be its visuals. It can be, but it has to be supported by something. That's where we get to gameplay. But in those situations, when you overemphasize the visual component of an experience, whether that be film, whether that be games, whether that be a variation of film that I like to call animation, it can fail even though it looks amazing. And Jedi Survivor was actually the example I was going to go to, but if we're going to talk about PC, we have to talk about variations in hardware. It's very hard to design for PC because no one has the exact same rig. Well, not nobody. Statistically, somebody has the exact same rig. But the idea there is that it should be accessible to somebody with these minimum requirements and then preferred requirements. And you've got beautiful looking games like, and here I go again, The Last of Us, that released on PC and just did not perform.
Mm-hmm.
Like in a satisfying way. And I've read so many headlines about Jedi Survivor, which looked great and I'm sure plays well. And we'll get into how those two things can really impact each other here in a minute. But, why is that your priority? I think it comes down to marketing, but it really is it's a kerfuffle at the moment, especially with a lot of, the PC market. I'm not sure what Zach, you would probably know better than I would, but the actual PC market, I feel like has become a lot more accessible to people and a lot more appealing to people as opposed to consoles. If you design something for PlayStation 5, it's optimized for the PlayStation 5. If you design something across two consoles, it's optimized across two consoles. Ideally.
Yeah.
But if you design something for a PC, you're trying to build something that can run on Dr. Garage's garbage truck. Like, it's a whole different world there. And the emphasis on fidelity and the entire selling point of making the PlayStation, The Last of Us Part 1 is what they renamed it when they came out with the remake. The entire point was that it was fixing the fidelity, and I'll even admit to playing, because I replayed the first one on the PS4 remaster just, not even a couple of months ago. And I went, this is dated. It's still good, but it's dated. It's definitely not up to the standards that you want. So the entire selling point of selling this game for a third time was to make it look and feel better.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing as much as you want about haptics, but no, that's that. So I'm like, if that is your focus and it doesn't deliver in terms of performance, then one is taking from the other.
Well, to answer your original question, you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about development. I don't know specifically about PC, but I know for a fact that generally speaking, I think developers have been frustrated by Xbox's move to have two different consoles with drastically different performance specs.
I would have to imagine.
Yeah, I think the lower end one is largely seen as a pain because it is a handicap on what developers can really do for, I'm blanking on, it's what, Series X and Series S, I think.
S. Yeah, Series S would be the lower end.
Yeah. So the Series S is really limiting what developers are able to get out for the X. So anyway, if you're running into that issue...
It's the same problem with cross-generational games.
Yeah, I mean, there's that too, but also if you expand that out to PC, I mean, you already hit on it before. It's exactly what you said. There's not the same specs for everything, so you have to have like a minimum spec that you're willing to like build for, and then you, generally speaking, are building for whatever that minimum spec is and hoping that everything else works. But like the added thing with PCs that makes it extra messy is like literally, like you said, there's so many different like processors and graphics cards you can have. Like if you're not taking into account all the different ways that like cores work, like I think that's one of the issues with Jedi Survivor is like it wasn't optimized for like using all the cores in someone's processor, and so it just didn't run well. Like I don't know, like I'm not nearly technical enough to understand all the hardware side of it, but point
I wish
being,
I was.
yeah. To what you're saying with the Sony stuff, what I think is actually really disappointing is that you've got games like I've been playing through the new Amazing Spider-Man, or whatever the Spider-Man game is, the one before Miles
Spider-Man.
Morales. Yeah.
Spider-Man Miles Morales is also very good.
I haven't played that one. I don't own that one, but I'm playing the other one on PC, and it runs great. Like Sony was doing a really good job of taking their really high fidelity games
Horizon.
and porting them to PC for the most part. And then they just like started sucking with I believe Horizon Zero Dawn had some issues, but The Last of Us was one of them for sure that had a lot of problems. I think God of War, the first God of War, well, the second one's not on PC yet, but the first God of War game I think was well optimized, but like people just in general have had a lot of porting issues lately.
Well, I mean, porting's a whole different conversation that we could probably spend an entire episode on.
I mean, it is, but it illustrates the point, though, that, like, there was one of the articles we read where the guy's like, I don't understand the graphics versus gameplay or, like, performance discussion, because if a game looks great but it performs like crap, like who's going to want to play that game? And I think that's illustrated by Sony and a lot of other studios' failures to make good PC ports, because like, would you call it, hypothetically, right, you've never played The Last of Us, the first one, and then it comes out on PC in the state that it did, right? Like, would you consider that a good game?
Well, well, here's where we get into one of the hairier issues, which is, if I had never played The Last of Us at any time on any console, and I played it for the first time on PC,
exactly, yeah, like no preconceived notions. Like, this is literally the first time you've ever experienced this.
The first time I've ever experienced it,
yeah,
and I was impressed by the narrative. I would have a much different opinion of it if it ran like a big old pile of dookie on my computer. And this is supposed to be the enhanced ultimate version of that game. I feel like I would have had a hard time getting through it, because I mean, one of the games that I played a while back, and I might have mentioned on the show before, was Prototype.
Yeah.
Which was never like super crazy impressive in terms of its visuals, but it was going for some stuff, and it has some fun mechanics, and it was an interesting sandbox. But I quit playing that game twice because its performance was so absolutely dumpster fire garbage that the things I needed to get to were literally not existing in the world yet, because the pop-in situation was so bad. So I would call Prototype shy of competent, actually. And if it was my first time playing The Last of Us, I think I would probably have the same opinion. And it's an experience that, if you're in the mood for it, is, if you'll pardon the pun, a game changer, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So no, I think the performance itself at the expense, it falls into the rut created by attempting to create very solid graphics.
Well,
I will side tangent very briefly and say that this is another thing where the experience itself is different in film. I will point to the Avatar films, which have at best flimsy narratives. James Cameron should not be allowed to write. He should direct, and he's created through the work of many people phenomenal visuals and broken new ground, but the narratives themselves are not what I would call strong. So that's the selling point on that one. And you don't have to worry about performance for a film. You do have to worry about that in a game.
Yeah. Well, what I want to say though, real quick, is I mostly bring up the Last of Us thing, not because like, I don't even think that like they were trying to enhance it to this degree that like was unreasonable. Like, I think that's kind of the opinion with Jedi Survivor, but I don't know that that's the opinion with The Last of Us Part 1 release on PC. But regardless of that, it's more, my point with that more is just to illustrate like even a game that's as critically acclaimed as The Last of Us, the first Part 1, the uncontroversial one, people are willing to say, or you who's in very big fan is willing to say that you would not enjoy it as much if you like. I'm talking about a hypothetical world where the only version that exists is the PC version. I would actually argue, Aaron, I don't think you would have finished the game if it was as bad on PC. I don't think you could have experienced the story, because I know that's really your one of your big draws for it. But regardless of that, like, that's why I bring that up mostly, right? Is to just illustrate like how ridiculous the gameplay versus performance argument is, because like whoever, and I don't think anyone's really saying this, that like gameplay is, or sorry, not gameplay, that graphics are king, because if, the gameplay isn't there, if the performance isn't there, there's not a game hardly. Like, people won't put up with it for the most part. But that being said, the one thing I do want to tangent back to, because I don't want to completely leave this out, and I pulled the data, so I want to use it.
I would like you to, and I know you're going.
Or the Game of the Year award stuff?
Yeah.
So to your earlier point, Aaron, and to what I was talking about of kind of the industry kind of promoting this idea that like AAA high fidelity games are what you should focus on. When I was talking to you the first time, right, I was like, okay, like how can we illustrate that? Because we kind of had issues finding some actual data here, but it does seem to very much be a thing that's pushed. I mean, I hear it all the time, I guess. Without data, it's kind of hard to fully illustrate this. But if we look at Game of the Year awards, right, for the most part, it's actually more split than I thought when you're looking at BAFTA, the DICE Awards, the Game Awards, and the Game Developer Conference Awards. There's actually more of a split. But if we're looking at specifically the Game Awards, which I didn't realize only started in 2015, Aaron. I thought that had been going on for a while, but I forgot that it's actually relatively new. But I feel like the Game Awards are what a lot of people pay attention to. Like, do you think that's a fair statement in terms of like what people actually watch as consumers?
I think ultimately it depends on the person. The same way that like the Golden Globes are the second tier Oscars, and the Oscars aren't even well liked. It's not very well viewed anymore.
Well, I guess what I'm saying, like, I don't know anyone that's a consumer and not in game dev that talks about BAFTA or DICE or the GDC Awards.
I think when there was, I think the Game Awards would probably be the most viewed one, would be my guess.
Or it's like kind of like the Oscars equivalent, right?
Yeah. But Game Developers' Choice is up there. I actually don't think many people know about BAFTA for games.
Yeah.
And DICE probably falls somewhere, around 3/4 of the way. But yeah, no, the split after reading through this is quite fascinating, because it shows an emphasis every now and again on visual fidelity, and then a lot of the time shows an emphasis on gameplay and stylized art. And I actually think that it's really hard to not sound like you're saying that a stylized art presentation with great gameplay is not a pejorative by saying it's not photorealistic. And I think that's a stigma that we kind of need to remove from the cultural lexicon, because I mean, you can pull out a couple of examples here.
Yeah, well, I think so. I'm just kind of looking around here. Okay, like good example, right? That kind of illustrates the point that we're talking about. For BAFTA, and actually it was just BAFTA. I thought it was another one as well. I guess it was just BAFTA. So for BAFTA, 2015, or sorry, not 2015, BAFTA 2022, the game of the year was Vampire Survivor. Which, if you don't know what that is, it's
actually quite fun.
Yeah, I've actually never played it, but it's not an idle game, right, Aaron? But I mean, it's like kind of thoughtless.
No, it's not.
But it's
no,
not
it's
entirely.
It's not thoughtless. It is a fascinating. I mean, it's a roguelike basically.
Yeah,
but it's about you can collect some characters, but it's a mob control game.
Well, it's kind of like a deck builder in the sense that like you're getting different things and you're like, what's going to combo together well, right? Like it's not literally cards. You're not literally using cards. But if you think of a deck builder as in like collecting different buffs to get through a thing.
Well, you do actually collect buffs. I would hesitate to call it that. I would say that it's casual and accessible, yeah. but also very intelligent in its approach. It's a dungeon crawler, and also it's a bullet hell, but you're the one with the bullets.
I don't know. I think the enemies have a lot of bullets too. I've seen people in later levels.
Some of them shoot a lot of things. I've played more Vampire Survivor than I would like to admit.
Oh, I didn't even know.
Yeah, no, I have mostly on mobile. If I'm honest.
I didn't even know.
And the mobile version is really good, but it's just a really tight gameplay experience with graphics that looked like they could have been made 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's more of the point. All my random side information aside, it's a very like simple, well, I don't know if I'd say it is it knows what it is. It's not doing anything too crazy. It's just a really solid gameplay loop, very simple graphics that service the game. But the art style is solid. And so I think it's a solid indication of what we're talking about, Aaron, where it's like, this is not a photorealistic game. If anything, like you said, this game could have been made, 10 plus years ago, but it came out now and it's done incredibly well. I think a lot of people who are listening probably know what it is if they're, if they're into gaming. But that just won last year. It was
absolutely huge a couple of years ago. It was absolutely massive a couple of years ago.
Well, no, it was last year it came out.
In that case, that is one fewer than a couple.
It hasn't been out all that long. I know it's kind of crazy. It feels like it has been, but it really hasn't been out for too long. But I think that's like a good example. I'm trying to think like Inscription. I really love Inscription. That is actually like a card game. But the graphics in that aren't like, I mean, they're definitely not photorealistic. I think they're good. But that won the GDC or Game Developers, Conference Award in 2021. That one. Untitled Goose Game was a winner in a few what year was that? 2019, I guess it was the winner for DICE and GDC.
I want to say it was 19.
Yeah, I think that's right if I'm counting backwards correctly. But anyway, my whole point with this is like these games are winning awards, but what's interesting is if we look at the Game Awards, which what we've kind of said, Aaron, is, that's kind of like the Oscars. That's kind of like the thing that a lot of people pay attention to. Also, it's what a lot of influencers go to. So I think that kind of hypes it up as well, is that a lot of influencers go to the Game Awards. But if we're looking from 2015 to 2022 for the Game Awards, Aaron, there's only one game in there that I would not call AAA high fidelity. Well, for the most part. And that's actually It Takes Two. Which I'm excited it won for a few reasons. We've talked about that in an episode, so find the episode we did on that. I believe It Takes Two is in the title. But anyway, outside of that, like for the last however many years that is, 7 years, we've got The Witcher 3, Overwatch, Breath of the Wild, God of War, Sekiro, The Last of Us Part 2, It Takes Two, like I mentioned, and then Elden Ring. And I feel like some of those games are stylized, but like, I don't really know how to put it. Generally speaking, I do think there's more of a trend towards realism, with the exception of obviously Overwatch, It Takes Two, and Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild's actually an interesting one for later. I know, Aaron, you're passionate about a Tears of the Kingdom comment that was made, but
yeah.
But a lot of those are AAA games.
I would say again, and I know I warned you about this, Zach. I will have to bring this back to film, which is where we talk about commercial versus critical reception.
Yeah.
Right. So
actually, that's a really good point to bring up. Sorry.
What is going to bring in more revenue?
Yeah.
Look at Avatar 2: The Way of Water.
Yeah, that's the second one.
Is what it was called. Yep. Avatar: The Way of Water. It made $2 billion or something, and I've met like 3 people who ever watched it. So conspiracy theory has begun. But you know that's visual, that sells. The visuals sell. What do you remember? You remember the menu. You remember Anomalisa, which got beat out by Pixar, which was old school style stop motion. You remember those ones. You may not remember the other ones, but those are the ones that are going to sell. And a lot of the stuff that sells has created some, you know, they have done some amazing work on those films. I would include like the Spider-Verse movies in that, because those sell and they're ingenious. But the fact that those movies sell maybe on par with or more than the Tom Hollandaise Sauce films, it's fascinating to look at that. But then you look at the critical reception, right? Which one gets reviewed better? And you can do some breakdowns on your own time to look at the critical versus audience reception on sites like Rotten Tomatoes, and I think CinemaScore is one of them. And they do exit surveys, and you know, it's a fairly small sample size in comparison to something that's crowdsourced. But you'll often see that a lot of the time the movies that do really well with fans do really well with fans, both critically and financially, don't do very well with critics. And then you'll see at the Oscars that those visual effects heavy films that focus so much on the visuals as a selling point do very poorly with critics and very well with fans, I guess, or very well at the box office.
Yeah.
But to me, it does come down to what is the selling point, and I've got to give a shout out real quick to Adam from yourmoviesucks.org, and his review of The Lion King, directed by Jon Favreau, where it seemed like the entire thing was to heighten the realism of what you were watching. And they applied that thing for so many Oscars that it was bonkers. And, you know, people liked it well enough. People with a critical mind did not particularly care for it because it was not actually an enhancement on the original, which was, you know, obviously hand-drawn and beautiful, and also created its own technology in an exceptional way. But the entire selling point of that movie was, look how photorealistic we can make these lions without using any sort of insight to think about what is the experience. What are these characters communicating? And I think that there is an opportunity within stylistic animation, which is realistically what we're talking about, to have both. And if we're talking about something that is literally experiential, you have a control in your hand, you're at your PC, the conversation should not necessarily be about how it looks, unless it looks like garbage and it's selling itself as looking beautiful. because, stylized art still looks good. I would say that BattleBits as an art style, is it, incredible, photorealistic? No, it's not. It wasn't trying to be. It's not like they fucked up in the rendering and it all came out as pixels.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think, Hades is another good example of a game.
You're mentioning, just real quick, because I think this hits on the art style component, which we'll have to get to. I looked at the time and I'm like, oh God, we got to get to it. But I think this is important. You're really hitting on when art works in service to the game, right? So like with BattleBit, the simplistic art style enables them to do more complex things with the number of players that are on a server, with the number of particle effects, with, the all-out war feel, with destructibility, because there's less resources being spent on high-fidelity character models and guns, right? So the art works in service of the gameplay. To stretch that to The Lion King, the one thing that I remember really bugging me about those movies and The Jungle Book was how weird it is to see photorealistic animals talking and trying to emote. There's a reason that there's like anthropomorphization of
they'll anthropomorphize those characters
to convey emotion.
The reaction shots in Simba, communicate so much. Would a real lion do that? No.
Yeah, but it's weird when we don't have that extra emotion, because us as humans, we communicate obviously through a lot of visual cues. And so anyway, TLDR is that I think you brought up a really good point, which is that like, that is an example of the art style being photorealistic doesn't actually service the film in a meaningful way. And that's the thing that is really important, and why some of these games that may not have the most photorealistic art styles are still fantastic. And that's because the art styles, one, are beautiful in their own right, but also they're in service of the gameplay. But also, to your earlier point, that doesn't always sell, because a lot of the time what gets people in the door, so to speak, commercially, is the hyper photorealistic style.
And if you can do both, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Sony, except for their PC flubs recently, has been, exceptionally good at that. Another good example that you actually brought up in one of our earlier conversations, Zach, is Forza, where the art is like, holy shit, that looks like an actual ass car.
Yeah.
And there are caveats to that, as you brought up. Like when you're driving that fast, you're not actually seeing the environment very much. But, again, to go back to The Last of Us Part 2, we're looking at, photorealism, or as close as we can approximate it at this point in technology. And if you can do both of those right, Forza, to the best of my knowledge, is, because I've only played Forza Horizon 3 or 4. I can't remember which one at this point.
Or 2B3. To be fair, whatever the last one was that came out looks gorgeous still for the most part.
Oh, it looks stunning.
Yeah.
But that's what you'll see at these showcases, is like, look at what we can do with this technology. And that's how you're getting people to buy copies. It's not necessarily what I would say with like a Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, where it's like, look at this experience. And we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But it's just fascinating to see like what sells and what works. I think is actually the big discussion here. What sells, what works. Why does what sells sell, and why does what works work?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that having a conversation about it is interesting, and I think that the people who are paying the money want to sell, obviously, because it makes money. And the people who want to make something that works, make something that works and utilize what they've got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the most interesting, I've got a lot of thoughts on what we've been talking about, but just to make sure we kind of hit more on the art style side of things, I wanted to mention Aaron, and I brought this up earlier, but I think one of the interesting things around the articles that we've been able to find around this debate, which have not been that many. I'm sure there's a lot of YouTube videos that talk about this to some degree, but due to time constraints and whatever, we tried to stick with articles. But the Gamer and Forbes had their own articles. One called "Graphics and Gameplay Are About Mutual Interaction, Not Relative Importance," and the other one was
I agree.
By the Gamer, which was "I will never understand the graphics over gameplay mentality." What I will say about the Forbes article, I agree with. I mean, we've been saying that graphics and gameplay are a mutual interaction. That's 100% correct. I agree with that. But what I don't agree with him on is one, he says Monster Hunter World has bad graphics, which I think is bullshit, but whatever. And also he says that Forza Horizons is not enhanced by its graphics because of how fast you're going. I disagree so much with some of his perceptions of where graphics matter and where they don't. But the thing is that I don't think that either of these authors really are saying what we're saying, Aaron. I don't think that they're expanding it out to art style, because if you noticed with the Forbes article, even though he kind of hits the nail on the head saying graphics, what he really should be saying is art style and gameplay are about mutual interaction, because it really seems like people think of graphics as when someone says graphics, right? What do they mean? They mean high fidelity. And yeah, that can enhance things, but like you could have a world where The Last of Us Part 2 or Horizon Zero Dawn are not photorealistic, but they're stylized realism. And I think that they could be just as compelling depending on what the art style is taken. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that realism is always the answer to... I don't know. Did you read the Forbes article? Do you kind of get what I'm trying to get at?
I read all of it. No, I have so many examples of this, so I'll try and dig it down to just a handful.
Yeah.
And one of them will be a counterpoint. I will start with the counterpoint, and it's a game called. Man, I can't even remember what the game's called now. It's gonna
Wait,
be,
you're saying counterpoint to what I said, or a counterpoint to the article that
a counterpoint to my previous point. Again, my first point was actually going to be sometimes. So again, this is one of those things, and again, not to go back to the bear or any of the other food things that I tend to enjoy. Sometimes simplicity makes magic. Let the ingredient speak for itself. And
you need
the
to
best
ease
bite
off
of
the
food,
bear, man. That's what I'm thinking.
It's not the bear. They got complex, and I will be fully honest.
Sorry,
I did have a fully I did go to an Italian beef sandwich shop.
Oh, no. Aaron,
that was
it's outside the scope of graphics.
No. I'm saying, so like I went there but I had researched the place, and it's something so complex that makes something so simple, right? So the beef has to be braised for so long and then chilled for such a specific amount of time in order to make it taste the way that it does. And then the giardiniera has to be, cooked in a very specific way. And I'm like, okay, that's complexity that has become simplified. But the best bite of food I ever had was a raw scallop in a light ponzu sauce. That's all it was. A little bit of dressing. And it was the best bite of food I ever had, because the chef at that restaurant had the confidence to let the ingredient speak for itself and trust that his audience, by which I mean the customer, by which I mean me, was able to do that. Complexity simplified can work. And I also love the idea of taking something, very complex and making it even more complex. That's why I love the writing of Charlie Kaufman. If you can make both work at the same time, I'm good with that. One has to be in service of the other. You can't pick one over the other. Otherwise, you end up with a beautiful looking product that ends up tasting, feeling experientially bad. There's a way to do both. It just doesn't always come out that way. And I look at games like Hades. I look at games like that one that I was trying to I think it was called like a simple game or a stupid game or something like that. And it was this game where you just played as blocks, very much in the vein of Thomas Was Alone, although it predated Thomas Was Alone, if anyone's played that, where it's got this very complex narrative presented very simply. And okay, you're looking at Tetris blocks, but it's telling you this, pretty impactful story. It's Zach, I'm actually not sure if you were there. I presented that one game, the trailer for it at a meeting for our Game Developers Association stuff. I don't think you were there that day, but again, you can use very simple ingredients to make something very complex. And maybe I'm biased because I'm not, like a frame rate chaser, and 4K does not matter that much to me, as much as it does a good experience. But a simplistic approach to something like that, if that's what you've got to work with, works. And if you can make both the graphics and the gameplay work together in tandem, you've created magic.
I mean, for God's sake, right now, there's a game. I mean, the game is literally, I'm convinced, just a bunch of Unreal Store assets that have been thrown together. But there's this game that's called like Only Up or whatever that everyone's been playing. It's essentially the same thing as Getting Over It with Bennett, whatever his name is. But
yes,
it's like a parkour thing. That game is very simple. There's not much to it. And it does not look great. I mean, it doesn't look awful, but like, you know what I mean? Like it is kind of just distilled down to what it wants to be. I'd say like Vampire Survivor is a good example of that. I think BattleBit's a pretty good example. So I would actually argue we just exist in such a time of like bullshit that looks really good, but is convoluted through games as a service and all these other things, that use these simple gameplay loops with a competent art style that services it. Like, I think that those are blowing up for that reason. Like, people just want games. They just want games that are games distilled to their truest form. I think that's part of why we're seeing a lot of these games blow up. But it's still, I still don't really understand why art style isn't the way a lot of this gets discussed, because like I said at the beginning,
style is the word.
Exactly, but people always just like this Forbes article is so fixated on good graphics supporting the game. And then when he lists things that are good graphics, they're all photorealistic games, or they're supposed to be, right? Like Hitman's technically not, I guess I mean, I don't know. It's supposed to look real, right? Like,
yeah, it is. I've played actually both of the two newest Hitman games.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm hitting on, Aaron, is it's just interesting because I'm sure someone's talked about this. We're not geniuses. There's no way no one's brought this up before. But I just think it's interesting because in that Forbes article, like I said, it's very clear that he's talking about when realistic graphics service a game, which to a degree is what we're talking about. But I think that it needs to be expanded out to art style. And then, the other thing is, that other article that we have from The Gamer, which I think you had originally referenced to me, which was just talking about the fact that like people were crapping on Tears of the Kingdom, which, episode on that, if you want our opinions, we talked about it earlier this season. Excuse me, sorry. People were talking about Tears of the Kingdom and shitting on it because its graphics look like ass, is what people were saying. I don't agree with that at all, actually. But I know you have plenty of opinions on that one, Aaron. So
no, I have so many that I will try and fail to keep this brief, but I'll try as hard as I can. My first thought is that it's a miracle that game can run on what is essentially a tablet as well as it does.
Yeah,
I've caught a couple of stutters. I've caught a couple of weird glitches in there every now and again, but the art style itself wasn't designed to look new. It wasn't made to be the photo. There's never been a photorealistic Zelda. Look back at Wind Waker. Look at look at any Zelda game in the 3D era of Zelda, and you're not going to find something that was trying to be photorealistic. It was trying to be stylistic. And I am tremendously impressed that they've managed to find their style, and the one that they might hold to for at least a couple more games until they change their style again, because the style constantly changes. I mean, even look at the difference between, pixelated and chibi for Link's Awakening.
Mm-hmm.
Nintendo does not hold to a style. I could go on about Mario, but the entire purpose is that those images are timeless. If the design itself is strong and the gameplay works, and the actual design of the world that you're trying to immerse yourself in, for in the case of a Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom or any of the other ones, several, maybe 100 hours, is not going to age poorly, because it will look like it was designed to be ageless. And that's very different than a photorealistic game. Like I referenced The Last of Us earlier, where I said, okay, this is a game that came out in 2013. And it looked dated by the time the remaster came out. And then by the time part 2 came out, the remaster looked dated.
Mm-hmm.
So the stylization of those things, I think there is a subtle artistry to making something that won't age, because it never has to.
Yeah.
In a sense, if you look at the Lion King, the new Lion King, the Jon Favreau Lion King, you're not going to think that it looks that great in 15 years. But you can still go back to Link to the Past, or Tears of the Kingdom, and be like, oh, this is a game, and I will be playing it.
Well, it's like you can play, Pac-Man, Dig It Dug, and Galaga now. And obviously...
Did you say Dig-a-Dug?
Isn't that what it is? Digger Dug? Is that what
it's called? Dig Dug.
Dig Dug? Well, that's what I meant. I meant that one. But anyway, you can play all those games.
The podcast is canceled.
Yes, it is. I canceled Aaron. No. But no, you can play all those games, and to your point, you can still have a lot of fun with those games, and I don't think the graphics are distracting. Whereas, you go to like Morrowind, and it does not look good. And that's because at a point in time that was supposed to be realistic, kind of to your point. And so I 100% agree. I think that's another portion of the conversation that we really haven't touched on, which is the fact that like focusing on photorealism is not a good like lifelong plan. It's really good in the short term, but if you want your longevity, it kind of limits your longevity to a degree. I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, I would argue that most Bethesda games look like dumb just from the get-go, but the problem is that they're trying to make it look photorealistic, and it just doesn't come through, which is the issue. Like if it's almost like a person with anxiety, much like myself, who uses self-deprecation as a defense mechanism. You can compare it to that. You can hedge your bets by going this way, or you can use your budget to go this way. And the budget is the better reason, obviously. But Bethesda games don't age well. I mean, Skyrim didn't look good when it came out, in my opinion. Morrowind did not look like a revolution when it came out.
Well, I won't claim that because I wasn't paying attention to what was out when that came out.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. I will just make the bold claim. But I'm saying, you know, if you're looking at making a really solid game, and I mean, again, like I said, The Last of Us still hasn't aged all that well visually, or performance-wise on the PC port. But you know, games like Breath of the Wild, as long as someone has a Switch, you're going to do that, and it's a timeless style. And I've actually been wondering, and Zach, I'm curious if you've ever had this thought, when the revolution of shooting films or making games that look like older games will come. There has to be somebody out there. I mean, in games, it's obviously it's a lot more evident. But I want to see a really talented filmmaker make a film that looks like a movie that would have come out in 1972.
I mean, you've already had some of that, right? I mean, you've got like Stranger Things. I mean, we've been stuck in.
But it doesn't look like it.
I mean, it doesn't.
It doesn't
look like it, but they're doing, you know, they're doing a lot of callbacks to it. I feel like artistically.
If we're doing nostalgia, Stranger Things actually burnt me out with its nostalgia. I don't need that kind of nostalgia. I want somebody to make a movie that looks like it came out. I want somebody to make a movie that looks grainy as fuck. I want someone to make a movie that was shot on some old ass film stock on an old ass camera, and that's the point. Which is, again, visuals. That's a selling point for me, especially with film. But I think there's a market there for that, and then would somebody ask the question, is the fidelity of this film a detriment or the opposite?
I mean, I think
that's
film,
the point.
I think film is a little bit different because film can be stylized, but it's a crisp image is important a lot of the time. Like, it depends on what you're going for.
It really does depend. And again, it's all about like what you're trying to communicate to your audience, whether that be a player or a viewer.
Yeah.
And I think that with the, you know, nostalgia train still running at full steam right now, newer Indiana Jones movies might benefit from adopting those old filmmaking techniques. It's the difference between practical effects and CGI, just in terms of the visuals.
Oh, but practical effects just always look better. Yeah,
they always do. Well, not always. That's not true. They do not always look better.
Well, if usually, you do them competently.
Usually, when done competently, they always look better. Guillermo del Toro, if you listen, please make Hellboy 3. You've won 2 Oscars. Please do it. Please make Hellboy 3. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there's an untapped market in that sort of nostalgia that games have actually gotten kind of right, where they've improved performance, they've improved accessibility, but some games have managed to preserve the old style visually while still enhancing experiences. Films have not done that. Films, if it's in HD, it does not feel like a movie made in the mid-80s, I would say. So again, as experience, the difference is you're not interacting with it in a tangible way. But I have now tangented for so the fuck far too long that I will shut up.
Yeah, I mean, given we're coming to the end of our allotted time, I think that the last thing I would say is I just thought ultimately this topic was a little bit interesting because a lot of the time, as we said at the beginning, you know, there's kind of an overemphasis on focusing on how good things look. Even though it was kind of taken out of context, there is a quote from Jim Ryan.
Jim Ryan.
Yeah, head at Sony, talking about how when he was at an old Gran Turismo. At this point, it's old, yeah, but a Gran Turismo event, and there are people playing the older Gran Turismo games. He had made a comment about how the new game looks so much better, and he doesn't understand why people would play the old one. Now, the intended purpose of that was apparently to just illustrate how good the new game looked and not to belittle the older games and people that played them. But regardless of that, I do think that it illustrates a point, which is that Jim in that moment was trying to sell the new Gran Turismo game on the graphics and how good it looks, regardless of any other intent. And, that just illustrates that having good graphics is a thing that larger studios and publishers care about. If it wasn't, then Sony wouldn't have all these games that look so, that go for high fidelity, realism, all of that. I just thought it was interesting exploring why are we seeing a lot of successes that are not in that same vein in terms of like looking super realistic, looking super high fidelity. And yet, they're doing really well. They're doing really well. And hopefully we'll continue to see more and more of these games that are stylized and not hyper realistic, high fidelity. And as we said, I think ultimately it just comes down to art style, and the art style being in line with the gameplay in order to help sell the experience. And maybe at some point we'll do a whole other conversation on this, Aaron, but I will say, I think that one of the big driving factors for this is also people are just really fed up with really bad AAA games. I think AAA has been awful lately. I think there's been a lot of really bad AAA games, and so people are going to more indie and AA to find solid experiences that actually run well. But anyway, that's kind of my closing note with a lot of what we talked about today.
Yeah. I would agree with basically everything you said. I guess my closing note is that there is room for both. If you have the budget and the time and you're not overworking your workers, you can do both and do it well. But you have to be, conscious of the fact that I do not remember The Last of Us exclusively because I did not buy The Last of Us exclusively because it looked good. I thought it looked fun to play. And I thought it looked like it had an interesting story. And I thought, I would like to play this. So, does Battlefield look a lot more realistic than BattleBit? Yes, of course it fucking does. Who would ask that question? Nobody except for me, rhetorically. Does The Last of Us look better than the original Legend of Zelda? In terms of realism, yes, it does. You got me. Congratulations. But there's room for both of these things there, and one does not have to take priority over the other. I really buck against the idea. It's why it's a very good it's a very good title. I'll never understand the graphics over gameplay mentality, because I don't understand it, because Minecraft is one of the biggest games of all time. And that's built around cubes. It's voxels. And you can even make voxels look beautiful. Yep. Look at Resogun. It's amazing. So no, I think it's just like I feel like we have approached a point where we can say this debate should maybe end. But as long as a game is good, then the game is good. And selling something on the merits of its visual presentation over the experience you'll have experiencing it is short-sighted.
Yep. Well, I said my last thing was the last thing, but I think ultimately what would be cool is if people could sell games based more on the gameplay instead of the visuals, but I kind of get it. It's easier to look at a game and be like, oh, that thing looks pretty, than it is to look at a game and be like, oh, that looks fun. Because sometimes gameplay can be harder to convey in a trailer or a short video.
You eat with your eyes first.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I get it, but it's also a little bit frustrating. Especially because we've gotten to the point where I think high fidelity can hurt games. At least when it comes to porting.
It certainly can, but I think there are very appealing bits to both of them. So it's more just about evaluating the project itself, and the general populace deciding. Granted, gameplay can be very hard to convey visually. A lot of people were shitting on the fuse component of Tears of the Kingdom when it was pre-release.
Yep.
And I was like, I mean, Zelda games have always been a little bit janky. There's no way around that. There's a little bit of jank to be had. There's a quirk.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that it's not a one or the other. I think we need to all collectively kind of understand that the two can work in tandem, and that good art is, first off, subjective, and second off, means several different things. Great pixel art is amazing. Look at Stardew Valley. Great photorealistic art is amazing. Look at God of War Ragnarok, and for what it's worth, both of the Avatar movies. They'll push the technology forward. But if that's the only thing you're selling your project on, reevaluate why you want people to experience your art. That's my philosophy. Because there's a way for them both to work at the same time.
And talking about good art really makes me think about Dougie art.
Which one is it? It starts with an E, right?
I don't know if you actually had anything else. So if you have anything else, I can let you.
No. But it does start with an E. I can't.
It's Edgar Allan art. No,
Edgar Allan art.
That probably is actually a thing.
He wrote The Crow, right?
Yep, that's true. But I would like to give a quick thank you to Dougie Art, because Dougie Art is fantastic and helped us with our wonderful album art / podcast art / image emblem, whatever. My point being is that she's great. You can find her on Instagram or on Etsy at Dougie Art. Make sure to show some love and give her some support.
Yes, by all means do so, and I wholeheartedly encourage. As a fan of good art, I enjoy hers, and also as a fan of good music, I quite enjoy the fine tunes provided by Beach Girl. They gave us kindly our intro and outro music, and they have a bunch of additional stuff that does not sound anything like the stuff that you'd hear at the beginning and the end of our podcast. And you can find them on Spotify, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, just about anywhere that good music can be procured. You can find Beach Girl, and I promise you, you will not regret the listen.
It's true. I agree. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in today. We really appreciate it. Hopefully you found some of this at least moderately interesting, and hopefully also educational. So, again, this has been your host, Zach, signing off.
And this is Aaron signing off with an on the fly. And remember, when you go to a hotel, don't smoke in it. They don't like it.
Smoke on it.
Smoke outside of it.
No, on top of it, on the roof.
If you can get up there, do it there. That's outside of it. Anyway, goodbye!
Goodbye.
Did you say
old.
Dig-a-Dug?
Isn't that what it is? Digger Dug?